Professor Sacks, welcome to Mexico.
Many thanks.
And it's a real pleasure to have the honor to share with you a couple of words. And
just great to be with you.
Thank you very much. In one of your books, you show majestically how forces are shaping constantly Jewish identity, Jewish destiny. How does the state of Israel shapes contemporary Judaism, secular and Orthodox?
The state of Israel has changed the very meaning of what it is to be a Jew. Because before the state of Israel, Jews were homeless in the most literal sense, or at least in the sense of the poet Robert Frost, as home as the place where you have to go there, they have to let you in. And that is a terrifying condition. Today, because of the state of Israel, we know we have a place we can call home in that sense. And that means that not only the Jews of Israel, but the Jews everywhere in the world can walk upright with more confidence. It's given us, it's brought so much of Judaism back to life again. The Hebrew language, the landscape of the Psalms, to walk in places saturated in history, to be able to stand in a place and say, Aval zeh shelanu, this is ours. So I think Israel has changed the terms of Jewish existence in ways that are wholly benign.
So, if there's any future for Jewish communities outside of Israel? Professor de la Pergola, who, talks lengthily about the numbers and how numbers are shrinking outside of Israel in the diaspora communities, suggests that there's not going to be any Jewish community in the next 50 years, or they're going to be very disseminated. Should we all start making Aliyah? Should that be the future of the Jewish people?
Well, there are at least 1 million Israelis living outside of Israel. So.
But they're not precisely looking for a Jewish identity, what they're looking for.
That's true. I know the work of de la Pergola, and I studied it very carefully, because as Chief Rabbi of Britain, I had to think very carefully about the demographics of our community. We can talk about that if you want. But the truth is that Jewish existence has never been predictable. If I were to ask you 50 years ago, which would be the largest growing Jewish community in Europe, the last thing you would say is Germany. But Germany is the largest growing Jewish community in Europe. If I were to say to you 50 years ago, by 2050, France or Holland might have a majority population that is Muslim, you wouldn't have believed me either. I think Jews know how to live with what they call the black swan, Nicholas Taleb, the fundamentally unpredictable. So Jewish history has never been predictable. Yes, I read the demographics, I've studied them for many decades, but don't believe them. Now, on the specifics, I think Jews have to have a certain minimum number to be viable. So very small communities in the diaspora may have no future, but there are communities that have a critical mass, and they do have a future. I would regard it as sad that the first religion in the world to think globally, to believe in the God of everywhere, should suddenly turn its back on the global nature of Jewish identity in, of all ages, the age of globalization. So I think Jews should see themselves as a circumference of a circle at whose center is Israel.
We all understand that we have always lived in the diaspora. From the Tkufa David HaMelech and Shlomo HaMelech, there were already Jews outside of Israel. But what are the challenges that we're facing now? We're seeing a rampant anti-Semitism, that it's new again, or it wasn't that present after the Holocaust, for at least it was dormant for 30, 40 years. And now we we see what's going on in the world. How do we should face those challenges in the diaspora? How do we deal with this scapegoat you quoted?
The return of anti-Semitism within living memory of the Holocaust was the least predictable and is the least morally acceptable thing that has happened in my lifetime. I would not have believed that it was possible, but it is possible and it has happened. And therefore, I have tried to make it clear in all my remarks about this, and I've led the fight against anti-Semitism in Europe for a very long time, that we do ourselves a great disservice if we allow anti-Semitism to be seen as something in itself. I always say the hate that begins with Jews never ends with Jews. Anti-Semitism is merely the early warning sign of a much greater turmoil and breakdown within society. And I said to the European Parliament 15 months ago, if it is not safe to be a Jew in the streets of Europe, then it is not safe to be a European in the streets of Europe. We cannot fight anti-Semitism alone. The victim cannot cure the crime, and therefore we must persuade the general public in Europe that it is they who are a threat, not just us. Now, we succeeded in doing this in Britain, and the prime ministers with whom I worked since anti-Semitism reappeared, I first spoke about it in early 2002, namely Tony Blair, Gordon Brown, David Cameron, and Theresa May is in that camp. They have accepted this. They have led the fight against anti-Semitism. The one thing we should not do in the face of anti-Semitism is stand and run. We have to stand and fight, and we have to find allies in that fight.
Although what we're seeing is a huge massive immigration of Orthodox Jews from many places in the world to Israel, running away from anti-Semitism. Jewish from France, not precisely Orthodox, or they're going to Israel because they decide it's dangerous to live anymore in Europe.
I think that's very beautiful. Israel is the beneficiary, the Jewish people is the beneficiary.
So that's the answer. Israel is the answer for anti-Semitism?
Don't forget,
because it seems to be also the main cause of anti-Semitism.
When the Jews were exiled to Babylon in the days of Jeremiah, and they sat by the banks of Babylon, the waters of Babylon, and wept. Don't forget when they returned. And they returned over the several centuries. There remained a Jewish community in Babylon. And it was that community that provided a home for the Jews of Israel many centuries later, when under Roman conquest, destruction of the Second Temple, suppression of the Bar Kokhba rebellion, when it was no longer easy or safe for a Jew to live in Israel. And so that community in Babylon became the new center of Jewish life. And from it came the Babylonian Talmud. What I'm saying is, the natural drift of Jews to Israel, whether for positive reasons, because only in Israel can you live a really full Jewish life, or for negative reasons because of anti-Semitism, that's great. But where we are able to maintain a global presence and at the same time sustain our identity, then we can and should do so. But all the time remembering our connections with Israel. We send virtually all our Jewish kids to Israel to spend extended time there, and they should always feel that ultimately is my home.
What advice would you give a rabbi in the diaspora? We live in an age of incredible advance in science, communication, more information available. Rabbis, they need to be addressed, or they need to address questions that maybe 30 years ago were not asked, or people were not that informed. What advice would you give
Well, luckily, we did it, and our rabbis are running with it. In Britain, we have several rabbis who are scientists as well, who write about science, write about the connections between religion and science. Most of our rabbis use the new technology to communicate. It's very user-friendly technology. We ourselves have been pioneering the use of social media, the use of videos, the use of whiteboard animation, all sorts of techniques that we're using. I think we should embrace every challenge. To be a Jew is to be unafraid of challenges, practical or intellectual.
And segregation, it's an acceptable way to live a Jewish life in order to protect the community?
In biblical Israel, there were a group of people, the Kohanim, who lived very close to the temple. There were the Leviim, who were not part of the general public. They had their special holy duties. The tribe of the Leviim and the Kohanim were special holy people who lived pretty much on their own, in their own enclaves, and did not engage too much with the rest of society. So we've always had a certain group of people who led very holy and very segregated lives. And we always had the majority of the Jewish people who went out into the world and sustained the very holy people, sustained the Jewish people as a whole. So I think there is a place for segregation. It comes with a certain attitude to holiness, but it's certainly not the way for all of us.
In the diaspora?
In the diaspora, segregation is one way of confronting the challenges of a very secular culture. Namely, you build a very, very high wall between you and it. However, the sages told us something about this, and you can see this in the commentary of Rashi to the passage of the spies in Bamidbar chapter 14, where he tells them, go and look at the land and see what kind of cities they live in. Are they open cities or are they walled cities? And the spies came and they saw that the cities had very high walls. So they thought the cities are strong, therefore the people are strong. And Rashi tells us that was exactly wrong.
The opposite.
If you live behind high walls, that means you're not strong, you're weak, and you have to have walls to defend you. But if you're completely self-confident, you're somchim al gvuratam, you rely on your own strength, then you live in open cities. So if you are completely unfazed by the intellectual challenges of the modern world, you live in a city without walls.